All right. Good morning. Welcome to Wednesday. Halfway through the week. We're getting there. Anna's kind of looking at her paper like, no, we're not getting there. We're not going to make it. Let's say hi to who's here first before I start talking. So Sala's here, good morning, and Miles is here, good morning, and Vicky, hello Vicky, and Mike, good morning Mike. Where are you? There you are. Sam's here, good morning, and Daniel's here, good morning, good evening Daniel. Good evening to you, Gabrielle. Chan's here, good morning, and Miles is here, good morning, and Amy is here, good morning, and Adel is here, good morning. That's a long list. Okay. Yesterday, we were talking a little bit about sexism and sexuality, right? So we watched that TED Talk on Christopher Ryan. We talked about the idea that there are different kinds of expectations for men and women based on sexual behavior. And we kind of asked the question, why do we have that double standard, right? And Christopher Ryan suggested that in fact there's a bit of a biological basis to this. But also a social and a cultural one, right? So Christopher Ryan said that he thinks that our biology, kind of the type of animals we are the type of animals that use sexuality to create and maintain social relationships within the group. We're not necessarily pair bonding monogamous animals. However, we do act that way because of our culture and our socialization, right? Which we know to be very powerful motivators of human behavior, right? I went on to say that Christopher Ryan made a couple of points about women's sexuality becoming conflated with property rights and the idea that men monitor and control women's sexual behavior. And I tried to make a connection between that and the development of agriculture. So us humans had been hunting and gathering, just foraging for food for hundreds of thousands of years. And then around 12,000 years ago, in some parts of the world, some people start to grow their own food. They start to farm. And often what we see in communities that are kind of heavily devoted to farming, we see a lot more control of sexuality, a lot less equality between men and women, and a lot more concern for the parentage of a child, right? And so I said that this probably has to do something with inheritance, right? So inheritance of land, inheritance of wealth. Usually those things flow through the father's line in most of these societies, and actually in most world societies anyway. And so in the past, hundreds and thousands of years ago, before we had DNA technology and trashy talk shows to expose who the father of the baby is, before we had those things, people couldn't really know for sure if their son was actually theirs. And the only way to do it was to control the sexuality of people, but in particular, control the sexuality of women, right? And so women's sexuality becomes connected to the sort of generational transfer of wealth. And so in many communities like this, there's a lot of control on sexual behavior, and there's pretty harsh punishments for people, particularly women, if they break the rules, right? And we said that we can, let me just see what my next slide was. Yeah, and so that's kind of what Christopher Ryan meant when he said that women's sexuality had become attached to property rights, right? Because women's sexual behavior is directly connected in these communities with property transfer, right? With inheritance and with wealth. And I said we can still see some remnants of that in Western society here with the kind of terminology we use depending on whether, if someone's promiscuous, if they're a man, they get high-fived and called a bunch of cool names. And if they're a woman, they get called a lot of kind of negative names, right? And so again, there's a biology kind of connected to this, but there's also culture history connected to this as well. And again, if you look at hunter-gatherers, they don't kind of behave like this in terms of sexuality, right? They don't have inheritance because they don't own anything, so there's nothing to pass down. So if this child is mine or if it's not mine, doesn't make that much of a difference, right? They have nothing to pass down, and so they don't tend to be too concerned about finding out whether, a man's son is actually his or not. And again, hunter-gatherer groups tend to do things together. They tend to cooperate, and so raising kids is kind of a group activity anyway. So you may know who your father is, but you may have lots of people who take care of you in a hunter-gatherer group, not just your parents, right? So it's a little bit of a different situation. Right, we talked about patriarchy, and then we went on to watch part of this documentary on what stands in the way of women being equal to men. Sorry, I can't talk. I've got a few things floating around in my head, and I'm trying to focus on this one. We started watching this documentary, this BBC documentary, and this guy is roaming around the world talking to these young women, and we hear from four in particular, right? We hear from Vigdis from Iceland, and Lulu from the UK, and Shway Shway from Lesotho, and Mira from Jordan, right? And I was going to ask you these, but maybe let's finish watching the rest of it, and then we'll talk about these questions, right? So the social messages, if they're based in some sort of biology, how social institutions are involved, and then the big question, what's standing in the way of women being equal to men, okay? So let's get back to it. So online people, you'll see the link and the questions in Microsoft Teams from yesterday, so I'll let you do that. I think we watched, do we watch 20 minutes? Okay, good. So we'll start at 20 minutes today, and we'll watch the rest of it, however long it is. Then we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and discuss, okay? Yeah, okay, let's do it. Online people, I'm setting you loose to go and watch the rest of this documentary, and we'll see you after the documentary and after a break, okay? Here we are, we're back. We're unmuted. We've seen this BBC documentary. There's tons of stuff to talk about. Let's talk about some of those things. Let's start out with number one. So we hear more messages about boys and girls, men and women coming out in this half of the documentary. So what do we hear this time? Or things you remember from last time? Anything's fair game. What do you hear these young women or young men saying? We started off with the boys, those young people in Lesotho, right? They were at school and they were talking about husbands and wives, and what were the guys saying?
Jobs, like their wives have better jobs than them. They wouldn't want to like be with them.
Yeah, so it seems to be culturally unacceptable for your wife to have a job that earns more money than you. Guys, how do you feel about that?
It's okay.
Is that how would it be okay, or how would you feel about your wife having a job that makes more than you? And let's say like a good chunk more, not like $1,000 more a year or something. Like, I mean, like legitimately more.
Sure, why not?
Sure, why not?
Yeah, like our salary combined anyway.
Yeah, so you're good with it? It doesn't matter where the money comes from?
Yeah, like still like our money.
As long as you're living the life?
Yeah, like no problem.
Okay.
You would be a little bit proud by your wife, but a little bit ashamed of yourself.
You would be?
If my wife make more money than me, I would be proud of her, but a little bit ashamed of myself.
Why ashamed?
A little bit ashamed, yeah?
You use that.
What do you think, guys?
I think it's gonna be really good because, like, if you're running a family, like, you can't just like focus on one guy on what is kind of the income. It'll be better.
Well, and it will be as long as she shares, right? As long as she, that's your money, honey, and this is my money over here. Don't touch any of mine. As long as you share, I mean, your quality of life will be raised, right? But do you, and Sean thinks so too, but do you think that, what's that?
Like blessed.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like money from the sky. Do you think, do you think how do you think most guys feel? And girls, you can chime in here too. How do you think most, what's that? Powerless.
Or like they don't feel like they're in control because they should be like the head of the family and they don't think that they're providing enough. And for some reason, psychologically, it's like it's messing with their like manlyhood or something.
Sure.
That's why like there's a lot of because I think I don't know what year it was, but like it was starting to get popular where like men like they have like stay-at-home dads, but then that ends up being like they cheat on their wives or something because they feel like they don't like the wife like they need like attention or something from the wife or like I don't know or something like that.
Right. So, yeah. So you said that it kind of challenges the manliness of men, right? So one of the things that men are supposed to be, quote unquote, we're supposed to be strong and tough and all that stuff, but we're also supposed to be the head of the household and the provider, right? That's the social message that we've received. And so some guys, if that is threatened, then you're threatening their very masculinity, right? You're threatening their identity because they think they're supposed to be this thing, and if they're not that thing, then they're not a man, right? And I suspect that the young boys that we see in Lesotho there are feeling just that way, right? And they say, yeah, well, if I'm not the provider, like what's my function? Like what good am I, right? And so for them, their idea of what it is to be a man, and even just maybe what it is to be like a useful human being, is very tied up in them being the provider, right? And so it's interesting, right? Because on the one hand, we're telling women, young women, yes, you can be anything you want, you can go, you can be successful. But then guys are like, yeah, but don't be too successful because then my masculinity will be threatened, right? So I'm not saying either side is right or wrong, but it's interesting how we're encouraging one side, but then we're kind of forgetting about the socialization on the other side, right? Where we're encouraging young girls, which we should definitely do, but guys have to, guys need some re-education as well, right? Because they feel like having a wife that would make more money than you do would threaten their identity, right? Their masculinity. And you might roll your eyes and, oh, you're threatening their masculinity. You might roll your eyes, but I mean, that's an important thing, right? Because to have your femininity threatened is also hurtful and upsetting, right? So don't roll your eyes at it too much. Guys, it's not the end of the world for guys, but still, it's still an important thing that should be considered, right? Then we heard about the cows. What was the thing with the cows?
That it's like buying the girl for the family.
Right. So Shui Shui felt that. So what's the actual custom? What custom are we talking about here? Or
You give away your daughter, you get cows and money in return.
yeah. So there's a bit of a it's either a dowry or a bride price kind of thing where the groom's family will give a gift of some sort to the bride's family. In this case, it happens to be cows, might be money, it might be other things, depending on the country. And lots of cultures have this type of exchange that goes along with the marriage, right? So here they have kind of a custom where groom's family gives cows to the bride's family. Why on earth would they do that? In a traditional sense, maybe not in a modern sense.
To show respect.
Show respect?
I'm giving away something that's valuable to me. Like we should exchange.
In a way, right? So, because if you think about it, hundreds of years ago, you've got your family, and everybody in your family is kind of working on the farm, or they're herding cows, or whatever they're doing. Everybody's pitching in. Everybody's helping to make sure that the family is successful. But then, when this girl gets married, she's going to go and live with her husband's family. That's called patrilocal, or patrilocality, by the way, but we don't need to go into that. So she's going to go live with the husband's family. So the bride's family is kind of going to lose a team member, right? They're going to lose a productive member of their household. And so the groom's family is saying, look, we understand that we're getting one of your team members. We know that you're going to be disadvantaged by this, so we're going to try to compensate you, right? Because you're losing a productive member of your household. Here's a bunch of cows in exchange, right? And so again, in the past, it's not so much selling and buying, but it's acknowledging that they're losing someone that's important to the household, right? Somebody who has been working hard and helping to make the family successful. Now that woman is going to be working hard, helping to make her husband's family successful, and so the husband's family is simply compensating them, right? And in some cultures, it varies a little bit. In some cultures, there's exchanges that go both ways. So the bride's family gives the groom's family something and vice versa. It kind of depends on the culture, but it's not a buying and selling of things necessarily. But in some cases, it starts to take on that character, right? So, if you have a very beautiful daughter and you come from a very respected family, you might kind of shop around, right, and see what dowry or bride price people can offer, right? So you might try to marry her to an upper class family so that you can get more for your bride price, right? So sometimes little elements of capitalism kind of worm their way into a practice like this, depending on the country you come from and the situation. So I can understand the traditional sense is it's not a purchase in any way, but sometimes there are elements of kind of greed that can work their way into a system like this. And so Shui Shui's feeling of, oh, it's like you're selling me, that's not totally unfounded either. But again, it's a tradition in which the meaning is changing, right? Just like when we talked about the marriage yesterday with the bride being given away by her father. We do that all the time here in the West, but that's not what it means, right? Nobody's a possession. Nobody's giving anyone to anyone. It's just a custom, right? And the meaning of it is changed, but the custom remains. And here we see kind of a, the tradition is in transition, right? So it meant one thing in the past, people still want to do it, particularly older generations like we see, and young people are like, hey, this doesn't make sense to me, right? I don't think this means what you think it means, right? And so the meaning of this custom is kind of being reworked, right, or reimagined, and that's fine, right? Because cultures do change over time, and so that's an element of cultural change, right? There's this tradition that's going on. The old people think it means this. The young people think it means this, and it's an evolving tradition, right?
How about if like that thing where usually there's like two business like partners and then they kind of like make their kids get close to each other and stuff. And sometimes it's not really like an arranged marriage, but it kind of falls under that category in terms of their parents are the one who like kind of made it a thing, and it ends up like being more like a business deal than like an actual marriage. How about that? Because like you see a lot of that nowadays as well, but it's just less like it's more subtle than giving a cow.
Yeah, well, that's almost more of a classism kind of thing, right? So wealthy people often want their children to marry other wealthy people, right? They want to make an alliance that way. They want to protect their family's wealth, or they want to enhance their family's wealth. And so, yeah, sometimes that'll happen by accident because rich people tend to hang out with other rich people. Sometimes it will be kind of encouraged, and sort of, kids will be gently nudged in the direction of, a business partner's daughter or son or whoever that might be desirable. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that sometimes happens, and there might be an element of classism there, and it might be just some families are more involved in sort of trying to encourage romantic partners for their kids than others, right? Some families are like, yeah, go find someone. Let me know when you find someone good. Other families are a little more involved, right? So there might be a little bit of both there. And there might be some cultural practice too, depending on kind of where in the world that might be occurring. Chan says here, actually sometimes men will feel less powerful in the family if the woman makes more money than them. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, but they might, right? And again, that being seen as the head of the household is an important element of what it means to be a man. And so if they're not that, yeah, sometimes men can question their masculinity, their identity, their worth, right? Men often want to be needed because their socialization tells them that they are, right? So our socialization tells us that, yes, we have to provide for you women, and we need to protect you from all the harshness of the world, and we need to protect our kids. And so men kind of need to be needed because they're taught that they are, right? And so when they get evidence that they're not, like their wife makes $50,000 a year more than them, or even more, when they're not needed anymore, sometimes it's uncomfortable, right? It's like, oh, what am I, right? If I'm supposed to be a man, I'm supposed to be needed, I'm not needed, am I still a man, right? So lots of guys can have that reaction. And that probably plays into your comment about stay-at-home dads cheating on their wives, because they might just be lonely, to be honest, but also, yeah, they want someone to need them, and their wife, they may feel like their wife doesn't need them, especially in that kind of context. What else did we hear? So we talked to, what did we hear from, what was going on with Lulu and Lulu's male classmates, Bob and Zach? Well, Lulu kind of said that she was like grabbed from behind by someone, which is super, super uncomfortable and not in any way okay. What else did we hear from her? I know her accent is tricky to hear.
Guys in her class or like in her school were talking about like the way they were talking about women as kind of like degrading.
Yeah. So Lulu was saying in the first part of the documentary, but definitely in this one, was saying that she hears a lot of comments from her male classmates that are kind of overly sexual, offensive, degrading, gross, right? Why do you think these young men are behaving that way?
And they think that it's okay to say say sexual things to girls if they dress something inappropriate, but it's not like that. They should not let themselves. They don't have the consent to say things like that.
Right. So, in part, so these guys are saying a bunch of these inappropriate things, right? And the girls are complaining about it, right? Lulu is saying, yeah, I don't find this funny. I don't find this appropriate. I don't enjoy these guys talking to me about explicitly sexual things. This is gross. Please stop, right? She's kind of saying that. But the guys are saying something different, right? The guys are saying, oh, well, we're just... Right, the girls want the attention. How do we know that the girls want that kind of attention?
It was the same thing with like the Harrison Ford thing, where like they say that they don't want it, but the guys think that deep down inside girls actually want it. And the way they like got that message is they say that if you don't want the attention, or if you don't want to like, then don't use makeup and all that, and like don't dress up.
Right. So first of all, there's the social message, like you mentioned, that girls don't know what they want, or they do, but they play hard to get, and you just have to keep pushing, right? And so there's a pretty clear social message circulating in society about that, and Harrison Ford was nice enough to demonstrate that for us, right? Thanks, Harrison. He was nice enough to demonstrate that for us. And there's this idea that makeup and looking a little bit sexy indicates that you want that kind of attention. But that also but the idea behind that is that girls dress up and make themselves look pretty exclusively for men.
Which is like not true.
It's not? Seriously?
Like there's a meme going on that not meme, but it's a quote I think that that girls wear lipstick under the mask, so it shows that they wear it for themselves, not.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, it's like the saying where it's like, I don't dress up for men, but like I dress up so that 13-year-old look at me and like when I grow up I want to be.
Right. So shocking, right? This just in, people. Apparently, women just don't dress up to get the attention of men. Apparently, women dress up because it makes them feel good about themselves, and they like to look pretty and feel confident. I think we all feel more confident when we're dressed, when we're nicely dressed, right? They might dress to inspire younger people, right, to look like them. They might dress to be professional. And like Anna mentioned, there's a meme going around with women wearing lipstick under their masks, right, which proves, as if we needed proof, we don't, but proves that, yeah, women dress up and wear makeup and make themselves pretty, sometimes just for themselves, sometimes to get noticed by a certain boy, but not all the time, right? Women dress up for themselves, women dress up for each other, and sometimes for a guy or a girl.
Opposite because it's either you dress up and get noticed, or you don't and you're not allowed to dress up. So there's no in between here.
Right. So what the guy said, what the guys in the alleyway say is again kind of an all or nothing scenario for women, right? It's kind of a binary opposition. And we said yesterday, yeah, if girls are kind of sexually active, they get slut shamed for that. If they're not sexually active, well, they're a prude, or they're cold, or they're, called offensive names. So there's no in between for girls, right? That they do or they don't, they get called bad names. And here, the same thing, right? You either dress yourself up and make yourself look pretty, and that apparently proves that you want all of this, explicit sexual talk in your direction, or yeah, just don't dress up and don't wear makeup then if you don't want that.
Almost as if like when the guys are getting blamed, or like the guys are getting questioned why they say
Yeah. So these guys are saying inappropriate things, and whose fault is it? It's the girl's fault, right? And is it? No, it is not, right? So individual people are responsible for their own behavior, right? And so women can dress or act however they want, but none of that excuses men's behavior, right? And so just because a woman is dressed very attractively, even if she behaves a little flirty, it doesn't mean that you can just say whatever you want to her, right? But these guys don't seem to be able to make that distinction, right? They seem to, it's an all or nothing kind of thing. And in their minds, even though they're probably not thinking about it at this level, but women are responsible for their behavior, right? Women are responsible for their actions, right? And we talked about this yesterday, where in many cases women are made responsible for the sexual behavior of men, right? And so I told you about that case in Alberta where it was a sexual assault or a rape case, and the judge, shockingly, asked the woman who was raped, well, why didn't you just close your legs, right? And so the question, of course, is, why did you allow this to happen? Clearly, this is partly your fault. And it's not, right? It is not women's fault if they get raped. It is men's fault who do it, right? The job as a man is not to rape people. It's not your job as a woman to somehow avoid this situation. Although, unfortunately, that is the situation we're in, right? Women have to be cautious and careful. They shouldn't have to be, but they do, right? But again, it's not women's responsibility to try to control men's sexual behavior or try to keep men from behaving badly. It's men's responsibility to not behave badly, right? What else do we hear?
Culture and basically they say that you're protecting you. They explicitly said that the father, that he's explicitly said that he values traditions and respecting their own culture over equality.
Hmm.
And but at the same time, a lot of the bad behavior is masked by that. Like that's used as an excuse. So
Yeah, we see that. We definitely see that in Jordan with Mira's story, right? Her father explicitly states that, tradition and culture is more important than equality. I think we kind of get that sense from Shui Shui's experience as well, right? But I think it's, even though we see it most clearly in those two instances, I think that's probably common to all cultures all around the world. Often we say, well, that's just the way it is, right? Or that's just the way things are. And so again, that's why culture is so powerful. We internalize it for so long that it seems as if it's the only way, or it seems as if it's just the natural order of things, when in fact it's not, right? It's just that we have decided that this is what the meaning we're going to give to things, and this is what we're going to believe, and then we teach it to ourselves, we spread it around, everybody reinforces the message in society, all the movies you see reinforce that message as well, and eventually it just seems like that's just the way it is, and it's hard to imagine any other way in which it might occur, right? And so yeah, sometimes culture gets used as a bit of a justification, like, well, that's our culture, or that's just the way things are, or that's the right way to do it, right? Why is it the right way? Well, we've been doing it that way for thousands of years, and things are okay, right? So it's very easy to kind of explain things away by saying, well, this is what we've always done, right? But again, just because you always did something doesn't mean it's a good idea to continue it, right? That's not thinking critically, right? In the past, I have eaten an entire bag of Oreos in one sitting, but wasn't a good idea then, and it doesn't mean it's a good idea now, right? So again, just because you did something in the past doesn't mean it's a good idea in the present or the future. But often we do that, right? Often we lean on tradition or lean on the way we've always done things to kind of explain them away. Haneen says here, for example, when Mira from Jordan said that she wished she can express her emotion like men in her culture. Yeah. And I think we talked about that when we were talking about, when we did the alien thing, the alien exercise. So we said that there are, I think we probably agreed that men and women have similar emotions, right? We're all human creatures, but the way in which we express those emotions are different, or we're encouraged to express them differently, or there's some emotions that we are often not encouraged to express at all, right? And so those things are gendered. Some of them are cultured, right? Some cultures are much more expressive with their emotions. Some cultures are, they value, repressing your emotions and, showing self-control. Depends on where in the world you happen to be. But indeed, Mira is supposed to be kind of soft and, she's supposed to do what she's told and she's supposed to be respectful. And her brother, Saad kind of breaks the rules, right? He's out there playing basketball and he's like, yeah, I break the rules, haha, whoops. And he doesn't seem too concerned about breaking the rules. And I would imagine that when he does break them, the consequences are not that severe, right? But I'm imagining that Mira is going to have a different kind of pressure put on her to obey the rules, right? And I think we see that. With Shui Shui when she and her mom are having the sex talk. Poor girl. The sex talk is pretty uncomfortable anyway, but when there's a camera crew there filming it, I feel, poor girl. But anyway, they did a great job. But her mom was kind of having the sex talk with her, right? And saying, you have to be careful. Don't let boys pressure you into sexual activity. You could get pregnant and that would be kind of a problem because you're only 16. And there's a high incidence of AIDS in our country, and so you don't want to be, you don't want to get HIV. That's bad too. So she's having this talk with her. But do you think that boys are getting the same talk? No, they're not, right? So again, we see more evidence that women are made responsible for men's sexuality, right? Because women are saying women are getting the talk, you've got to be careful, don't let guys pressure you, you have to worry about getting pregnant, you don't want to be HIV positive or get any other STDs, blah, 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 blah. But I suspect not many young men are getting the talk, look, you may be very eager to do something with a girl, or a guy, a girl, but, you need to slow your roll and definitely do not pressure them into anything they are not ready for, because they might get pregnant or they might get an STD or you might. And so again, there should be a conversation happening with both genders, but I suspect women are getting the talk, young girls are getting the talk all the time, and young boys are getting the talk occasionally, if at all, right?
When guys get the talk, I feel like it's mostly like they're saying what you can do to like girls, but not also like putting it into their heads that like if the girl gets pregnant, that's also part of his responsibility. Because I feel like in society, like every single time like there's like a teen pregnant case or whatever, it affects more on like the girl, but like the
Sure.
guy is not supposed to like take more responsibility or something. They're just like, well, you have to focus on your school and stuff, not like thinking of the future. Like he also has to take part on it.
Yeah, so like a teen pregnancy, a 16-year-old pregnancy is going to have a pretty significant effect on the rest of your life, whatever choices you make after that point. And of course, boys have the ability, not that they should, but they have the ability to run the other way, right? And of course, girls do not necessarily have the same opportunity, right? They can't run from it. And so, but yeah, you're right. Again, boys aren't taught things in that way, right? They're not really taught to take responsibility. They're not taught to think it through. And again, they're not necessarily taught about consent, or simply, just don't push people into things that they're not ready for or they don't want, right? Or they don't want right now. And so, but again, it often falls to girls to be the ones who are having to resist because guys are the pursuers, right? Guys are the hunters. And so there's a lot of pressure on young women, not just because of the reproductive concerns, but also because of the fact that boys aren't getting taught to slow their roll, and so girls have to they have to carry all of it, right? They have to carry all of the burden of, wanting to be in a relationship with this guy, but somehow, slowing him down, right? When he, part of that work is his.
Also, like when a girl goes out with her friends in Mira's country,
Right.
I think it's considered a bad girl, a liberal girl.
Right.
My father says, which is not, because if you're hanging out with your friends, it doesn't mean that you are bad.
Right. So Mira's father Marwan expresses some concern about some of the girls that his daughter might hang out with, right? Which I think is probably cross-cultural, right? All parents want their kids to hang out with good kids, right? They don't want bad influences. And Marwan's not entirely clear about who he feels are, bad girls. He says illiberal girls or girls who come from liberal girls. Yeah, or liberal families he's kind of concerned about. And he's not entirely clear what that means, right? In terms of what would fall into the category of, too liberal for him. So there's that too, right? And so, yeah. Hanine's got a little more here. She says, the girls in the video were worried about their career, so women who is successful will suffer difficulties getting married. Yeah, it can be, right? So girls are often given the message, well, they're given this contradictory message, right? You can be successful, girls, but don't be too successful, because, and you said that, right, Sabrina? Not maybe like a few days ago or last week? I think you said, yeah, girls are given the message that they can be successful, but don't be too successful, or it will threaten the masculinity of guys, right? So that's good, Hanine. Because men will not get married to successful women because they are worried that women will control them because she's in a good position. Yeah, but that's very true. But the question I have for you is, do you feel that your husband would be in control of you if he made more money than you, girls? Because I mean, that's the traditional way that it's supposed to be.
Money is considered the power. So if you have more money, it means like you have more power in this society.
That's true.
And I think that also falls like back like the old days where I think you see a lot of like women, even though they're working, but I think there was like an era where like women are just like they're like gold diggers. Like that's what people like see them as. It's like for example like Marilyn Monroe, like she's an actress and all that, right? But there's like so many stories about how like she only wants to get close with like rich guys and all that because like deep down inside she's just like a gold digger and all that. Which I think that also like even till this day there's still that stereotype of like women like wherever the money goes that they'll go, and like
Right.
they wouldn't do anything to risk that for themselves because like they're not supposed to be like successful and stuff. They're supposed to be at home and like just wait for like men to bring like money to them.
Which is so interesting, right? Because there's this stereotype of gold diggers. What's a gold digger, by the way?
A woman that only cares for men because of their money.
Right. So a woman who's only interested in men for their money, right, and trying to sort of get their hands on it. Which is interesting because you've got Marilyn Monroe accused of being a gold digger, and Marilyn's around in the 1950s, late 50s, maybe early 60s, late 50s, early 60s. But if you were a woman in the late 50s and early 60s and you wanted to make a lot of money, really, what are your options?
Singer, actor.
Yeah, the big famous ones, if you can manage that. But if you don't win the performance lottery, which basically that's what that is, how are you going to make a comfortable living for yourself?
From a man.
From a man, right? Yeah, you're not gonna make a lot of money and get a mansion living, working in a diner, or working as a nurse or a teacher, or any of these kind of traditionally female occupations. So the only way to get access to those resources is through a man, right? And so it's kind of strange because on one hand, society is faulting a woman who is doing this as a gold digger. They're saying, oh, she's awful. Yeah, but at the same time, there's no path to wealth or success for her in a legitimate way in terms of going to university or being the head of a company or whatever it is. She can't go this way, but if she goes this way, she's vilified.
They have like the education, like for example, Jackie O, like she was like former first lady and all that. Even after like John F. Kennedy died, she married to what's his name?
Aristotle Onassis.
Yeah.
That's a
And
name.
A lot of people are like bashing on her on how she's actually raised from like a well-educated family, and I think her family is like rich, like they're comfortable.
Right.
And she went to university and all that for that time. For a woman, that's pretty, like that's something.
Yeah.
And it's not like that she's like some sort of like, she's not dumb or whatever, but even for her to have like all that facility that she had, for her to like even want to live like the life she wants, she needs to like kind of work her way up in terms of like marrying another rich husband, because like she's like a widow.
Yeah. So she was. So sorry, just so I don't misinterpret your point. What's the main thing you're trying to say there?
Like even with education, or even when they're like from a good family, they still like women don't really have a choice back then to like kind of make it on their own. They need like a man to kind
Yeah.
of make their dreams come true.
Yeah. If you make men the provider, right, and the men as the source of wealth and production in society, but then you vilify women for finding that attractive, does that make any sense? No, right? You're saying women, the only way you can gain financial security is through men, but then you criticize them for looking for that financial security in a man. Like, you can't have it both ways, right? Like, you can't, again, women are, they're in a no-win situation, right? Either you be sexually active and be slut-shamed, or you're not sexually active and you're a prude, right? Or you can't make money, in society because men have sort of monopolized the world of work. And so if you try to find a man that has the best financial security for you and your family, suddenly you're a gold digger, right? You can't win, right? The social messages are contradictory, and you're stuck, right? And so, but maybe that's not surprising, because who's crafting social messaging? Men are, right? Yeah, the dominant group is. So of course men are advantaged by this, and women are stuck, right? What else do we hear? There was we were in the alleyway. The last thing we were talking about was the alleyway with Bob and Zach. Oh, and they watch porn, right? Because that just happens. Just like you're just walking down the street, and then suddenly, like, porn. It just happens somehow. I don't know. That's what they said. They said watching porn, it just happens. So when it just happens to these guys, what social messages and lessons do you think they're...
There's also a factor of like technology and the influence of internet. I think one of the moms, I think it was like, she was saying about like how it's okay for her and her friends, which she was younger, to walk at 2 a.m. in the morning going home, just like a group of girls, but she wouldn't let her kids do that nowadays, because the influence of like the internet and all that is just so scary.
Right.
And she wouldn't like risk her daughter.
Yeah, so she says that she feels things are less safe than for her daughter than they were for her. I'd have to see the stats on that. to be honest. I think most Western countries are safer than they were 20 or 30 years ago.
But like the more population there is, the more like
That's true in some cases. Also, kids tend to do things that they're okay, and then when they grow up and have kids of their own, they're like, I'm not letting my kid do that. So that's very common as well, right? So there might be a little bit of that, right? There might be, she might be right, but I'd be curious to see the stats, because I know that for most Western countries, they're not as dangerous as they were 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Like violent crime is actually declining in most kind of like G7 nations, if you will. But I'd have to see the stats. She may be very right. Just before we get back to that, Henning says no, because men love to show women their power. And yeah, and it's true, right? Because again, men are socialized to want to pursue that, and then of course they are seen as worthy because of it, right? So a rich guy is much more respectable than a poor guy, right? And so of course guys strive to be successful, and of course when they are successful, often they want to show that off, right? So again, the social messaging works both ways, right? Women might be encouraged to pursue a guy who's rich because they know that that's their path to financial security. Men might want to pursue riches because society expects them to achieve, but also because they can attract a woman, right? And they might show off their riches because of that. So the messaging kind of operates both ways, but it does operate to advantage men, I think, in this case. We've only got a few minutes left. What other things do you want to say about this that maybe we haven't talked about yet?
Normalizes over-sexuality, so the boys are constantly socialized, and in the video you can tell that they themselves don't even know that how the media is affecting them.
Yeah.
They genuinely think it is okay and they have the right to make comments.
Right. So media, whether it's TV or whether it's movies or whatever, or whether it's pornography, is very convincing, right? Especially, and think about this. Often think about this, is that your brain, okay, so the way it's evolved, the way that it's wired, your brain is basically the same brain we've had for the past 200,000 years or so. Okay, it knows things that of course people didn't know 200,000 years ago, but it's the same brain, right? And your brain doesn't know what century it's in, right? Your brain thinks it's back in the Stone Age, right? Because that's where it evolved. That's where it originated. It doesn't know that it's in a futuristic 21st century world, because it's still, it's the one we had 100,000 years ago. And so it kind of, sometimes it operates in strange ways, and I don't have enough time to talk about that, and I shouldn't have said it. But anyway, but you're right, Avera. So pornography transmits certain types of social messages that, and these guys don't really know what they don't really know what they're seeing in a way, right? They don't really realize the social messages that they're absorbing, because when they watch it, they're not critiquing it, right? We know what they're doing while they watch it. So they're not critiquing it, they're just absorbing those social messages, right? And they are doing it in a state of kind of high stimulation, right? Their brain is like lighting up with all kinds of things as they're watching this stuff. And again, they're getting problematic messages, right? About what men are like, what women are like, what men do want and should want, and what women do want or should want, and what sex is like and how it goes. And for the most part, none of those things are true, right? Porn is technically people having sex on camera, but it's not really that, right? It's a fabrication is what it is, right? It's no more realistic sexual behavior than, Avengers is a realistic way to deal with crime, right? It's not. It's not. What am I trying to say? What am I trying to say? Yeah, it's not. It's not realistic. But of course, when you're 16 years old, you don't know that, right? You don't really, in many cases, you don't know what realistic is. And so you assume that that is.
And she also talked about how like they don't really talk to anyone about it. So the only way for them to learn it from is that. So like they only have one source to like kind of know what sex is like. When
Sure.
in reality it's not like that. Which that's when like high schools are like, make sure that they have like proper like sex education.
Yeah, and unfortunately, in many schools, sex education is a biology lesson, right? It's like, here's how your reproductive system works from a biological perspective. And I guess that's good to know, but it doesn't really help you interact with other people, right? It doesn't teach you appropriate behavior. It doesn't teach you consent or how to talk about these things. And again, boys are far less likely to talk about this than women are, right? Because again, they're not going to get that sex talk like Shui Shui's mom gave her. At school, they might get some sex ed, but it'll be a bio lesson, right, in how human reproduction works. But as we've already said, reproduction is not what sexual activity is for, right? It's for building and maintaining social relationships. And young boys are not going to get any discussion or training or education in that regard, right? They're just going to be left to their own devices. And they're probably not going to ask either, because part of being a man means being a stud, right? Being, it's not, for a man, being a virgin or being sexually clueless is not desirable, right? It's not what a real man is supposed to be. So these guys are even less likely to put their hand up in sex ed and say, hey, I don't know how any of this stuff works. I need some help here. Guys are not going to do that, right? And so, again, they're kind of going into this, they're 15, 16 years old. They're going into maybe dating relationships with girls, and they don't know anything, right? Like, they don't know how relationships work. They don't know how to sort of negotiate consent with women. They don't know that the stuff that they've been, enjoying in their bedroom, the pornography they've been enjoying in their bedroom is not, at all realistic in terms of how these things go. And, they're going in blind, right? And you can see that. What else should we talk about that we didn't talk about that you would like to? We have 6 minutes. What's that? Free time. That's funny, George. Seriously. Yeah, I know you're serious. That's why I'm laughing at you. Okay. Anything else? Okay. That is all. Thanks for participating, everyone. Have a good day. I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.